Picture this, a hospital, completely locked down. Digital systems are held hostage. And a clock is ticking down on a life-or-death ransom. This is the nightmare of ransomware.
Yeah.
And it's not fiction.
Right.
This is hitting businesses and governments hard. We're talking billions of dollars, disrupted services. We're talking hospitals, power grids, you name it. Today, we're doing a deep dive on this debate about banning ransomware insurance payouts.
Okay.
So our source is this recent article in the Register, and they lay out the arguments for and against this pretty radical idea. Is it necessary? Is this how we starve out these digital extortionists, or is this going to give them even more leverage than they already have?
Yeah.
So before we get into this back and forth, can you just paint a picture for us? How bad is this ransomware problem, really?
It's like a wildfire, honestly. Ransomware is exploding. It's costing the world billions of dollars every year. It's not just the money. Like you said, you're talking about critical infrastructure. We can even be talking potentially loss of life. And the reason why it's so effective is because it's low risk, high reward. For these criminals, it's easy money. And these ransomware gangs, they're popping up faster than authorities can shut them down.
Yeah. I mean, the article cites over 2,800 ransomware reports to the FBI just last year.
Just last year, yeah.
And we both know that that's probably just the tip of the iceberg.
Absolutely.
So people are grasping for solutions, even if they sound a little drastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where this whole debate on banning these insurance payouts comes in. It's a radical idea, but it's gaining some traction. Even people like Ann Neuberger, she's the White House cyber chief, she says it might be the only way to really cut off the fuel from this fire.
Well, that makes sense, because if criminals are expecting insurance companies to foot the bill, the incentive to attack never goes away, right?
Exactly.
It's almost like paying a kidnapper's ransom. It just encourages more kidnapping.
Exactly. You're exactly right. And Neuberger, she compares this to fire safety regulations. You need a working fire alarm to get insurance on your home.
Right.
She thinks cybersecurity should be treated the same way. Make it a requirement for getting ransomware insurance. So we're incentivizing companies to think about security proactively, not just after everything's already gone wrong.
It makes sense on the surface.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there are people who aren't thrilled about that idea, right? I bet especially smaller businesses are hearing that and getting a little nervous.
Oh, for sure. And honestly, that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to how people feel about this. This article, it highlights experts with all these wildly different takes on what a ban on these payouts would even look like.
Okay.
And let me tell you, it gets interesting.
All right, well, let's do it. Let's break down this expert battle royale. Who are the people we need to know, and what are their arguments?
Okay. So in one corner, you've got Monica Shokrai. She's the head of business risk and insurance at Google Cloud.
Okay, so she's coming at it from the big tech perspective. I'm very interested to hear this.
Yeah, so her skepticism is basically this. A ban doesn't actually stop larger companies from paying these ransoms anyway. Because for bigger companies, the ransom itself is less of a concern. What they're really worried about is the cost of business interruption. They're thinking downtime, missed productivity, what it does to their reputation.
Right, and even with a ransom ban, insurance would still cover all those costs from the downtime, wouldn't it?
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's her argument. If companies like Google are still probably going to pay to avoid these huge losses from downtime, what's the point of banning the ransom itself?
Right.
She's also worried about what it would do to smaller companies. Because if a small business gets hit with a ransom demand, then you add on all those other costs from business interruption. If they don't have the cash reserves of a Google, it could put them under.
So you've got the big players potentially totally fine if there's a ban. You've got the smaller players potentially crippled by it.
Right.
That's quite a dilemma already, so where do we go from there?
And then it gets into like almost the ethics and the national security side of things, which gets really interesting. And this is where Tom Kellerman comes in. He's a cybersecurity expert over at Contrast Security. He actually supports the ban.
Okay.
But his reasoning is kind of chilling.
Okay, so what's the chilling take?
He says that paying these ransoms, especially when you're talking about groups that have ties to hostile nations, it's basically like sanctions evasion.
Ooh.
You think about it, 80% of the money that comes from ransomware is going to these cartels, and a lot of them are operating with protection from places like Russia.
Right.
So you could be paying money that's going against your own country's interest.
So it's not just about the money, it's about who it's going to and what they might do with it.
Yeah, exactly.
Man, talk about a moral dilemma for companies.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Absolutely, and it gets worse.
Okay.
Kellerman, he points out that a lot of times these ransomware attacks, they're not a clean break.
What do you mean?
They'll use it to gain persistent access, so even after the ransom is paid.
They still have a back door into the system. Oh, wow.
So they pay the ransom,
Yeah.
they get their systems back online,
Yeah.
but they don't realize that these guys still have the keys to the kingdom.
Right. Right.
And it happens more often than you'd think. And what that means is that they can spy, they can steal data, they might even be setting the stage for a bigger attack later on down the line.
And so you apply that to, like you said, a power grid or something even more vital.
Oh, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
It's really scary.
Okay, so you've got Shukrai talking about like the practicality of it, unintended consequences, and now you've got Kellerman talking about the national security threat.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to untangle a real mess here.
Yeah, it feels like we're trying to untangle a Gordian knot here.
Yeah.
And then just when you think you've heard it all, we got Steve Hahn over at Bullwall, this ransomware protection firm, and he's taking a hard line.
Okay.
He actually wants to go further than the White House.
Okay.
He wants complete ban on all ransom payments, no exceptions.
Wow, no exceptions. That's a pretty strong stance. So what's his logic there?
He basically says it's like negotiating with terrorists.
Right.
Any kind of payment, any concession, all it does is embolden them, and it funds future attacks.
Right.
He says that a complete ban, even though it would be painful, especially at first,
Yeah.
he says eventually it would starve out these gangs and force companies to take cybersecurity seriously.
Right. It's like ripping off a Band-Aid.
Right.
You know, it's going to hurt, but then it's done.
Yeah, yeah.
But the problem is we're talking about like the entire global economy.
Yeah.
It's a little more serious than a Band-Aid.
Right.
So does he address like that potential for chaos?
He does. He acknowledges that it's a dilemma, especially if you're talking about like a hospital or an essential service where people's lives are on the line.
Right, right.
He says that, yeah, in the short term, this could have some really bad outcomes.
Right.
But he thinks in the long run, this is the price we have to pay.
So do we rip off the Band-Aid or do we just keep playing whack-a-mole with ransomware forever?
Right, exactly.
And we haven't even touched on the fact that like, what about all the companies that can't even afford the kind of security we're talking about?
Well, yeah, and that's where Susanna Senor comes in.
Okay.
She's from Coalition. It's a cybersecurity insurance firm.
Okay.
And she says that this whole thing about banning payouts is way too simplistic.
Okay.
She says we're missing what the root cause is, and she calls it widespread digital insecurity.
So she's saying we're so focused on the ransom, it's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound.
Yeah, pretty much.
We're ignoring the real problem.
Exactly. And she says that bans, they rarely work long term.
Right.
There are always going to be these exceptions, these loopholes. And she says that criminals will find a way.
Right.
They'll just target the most critical, the most vulnerable, the most lucrative targets instead.
So it might even backfire. It might push these criminals towards these hospitals, these power grids, because they know that's where the money is, and they're more likely to get paid.
Yeah, that's her fear. It'll be this unintended consequence.
Wow.
She thinks, instead of bans, we should be finding ways to make it more expensive for these guys, right? Make it harder for them to actually pull off these attacks in the first place.
Right. An ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure, as they say.
Right.
But when that cure is potentially billions of dollars, you can kind of see why people are like grasping for some kind of solution, right?
Yeah.
And speaking of billions of dollars, the article talks about this real-world case. It's like throwing gasoline on a fire.
Right.
The United Health Group hack. Remind everybody what happened there and tell us why it matters so much to this whole conversation.
So United Health, they're like the poster child for how much these attacks can really cost when you look past just the ransom payment itself.
Okay.
So back in 2024, they had one of their vendors, it was called Change Healthcare, and they got hit with ransomware.
And they decided to pay up, right? It was something like $22 million.
Yeah, $22 million to get the keys to unlock their systems.
Right.
You figure that'd be the end of it.
Right, right.
But get this, the total cost ended up being over $2 billion.
Wait, hold on. How is that even possible?
So just to get their systems back up and running, that was almost $800 million.
Oh my God.
And then because of all the disruption, they had something like $1.4 billion in extra medical expenses.
Wow.
So they paid the ransom, but it didn't even come close to covering the total cost.
Talk about a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
It really shows why this whole thing is such a dilemma. So Do you risk those huge losses by banning these payouts, or do you just keep paying and know that you're just feeding the beast?
It really feels like a lose-lose situation.
It does. It really does. So what's the answer? If a ban isn't going to magically fix this, and we clearly can't keep doing what we're doing, where do we go from here?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's no easy answer. But it's probably going to be a bunch of different things all at the same time, right?
Mm.
We've got to make it harder for these criminals to make money, but we've also got to make ourselves less vulnerable, and that means better cybersecurity. And we're not just talking about governments and big companies. We're talking about everyday people, small businesses. Everybody's got to step up their game.
So investing in better technology, having a plan for if something happens,
Yeah, that's
it's all part of it.
all part of the solution, yeah.
And maybe, just maybe, we need to have some honest conversations about what are we willing to risk as a society and how much are we willing to spend to keep this from happening.
Absolutely. It's a big conversation to have.
It is a big conversation. This has been quite a deep dive.
Yeah, it has.
Lots of different opinions, some scary stories, and honestly, probably more questions than answers.
That's how it goes sometimes.
But that's kind of what we do here, right? We wanted to give you this overview of the ransomware insurance debate, tell you what people are saying, and hopefully get you thinking about what you would do. So tell us, what do you think? Is a ban the way to go, or is there something else we should be doing? Let us know. And in the meantime, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe out there.